Hi, this is Darren from SimNation. I'm hopefully I'll get this video out this time, but this is the Zero to Hero in Draft Day Sports College Football 2023 video I've been trying to do for weeks now. And just for context, the reason why I haven't been able to do it is, well, I'm perfectionist and I keep redoing it. Um, but the concept here is how do you take a team that has a very low prestige and take them from a prestige less than 50 and get them into the playoffs within 2 seasons. So I took Texas Tech in the SNCFL, which is SimNation's Draft Day Sports College Football 2023 League. Highly recommended, lots of great coaches. And I embarked on some very specific tasks in order to turn them into a playoff. So I'm going to flip the script a little bit. The result is they were 0-12 2 seasons ago when I took them over. I had last season to recruit and bring in the people I wanted. And this season, they're 10-3. They won the conference championship game, and they are in the playoffs. So a lot of that was doing something that was entirely different for me, and trying an approach that uh, we'll talk about a little bit later is actually being used in real life right now. So I think that the key to this new approach of zero to hero in the case of Texas Tech is you have to look at the game in a different way than you normally would. So for me, it was I'm not going to try to mold my system to players who exist. I'm not going to try to build a temporary system to get to my full system. I am just going to know what my system is, take one season to get all the players I need for it, all the coaches I need for it, and then I'm going to explode in the second season. So for me, what it meant was that I wanted to build a um, well, let me take a step back. So first of all, a lot of people have asked me why Texas Tech. Well, Texas Tech is in the hardest conference in all of SNCFL. It has the most human coaches. You have Frankie at Oklahoma State. You have Mike at West Virginia. You have Steve at Oklahoma. You have Starfinder at BYU. You have Shark at Iowa State. You have Van at Kansas. Uh, Kev was at Texas up until recently. So this is a really hard conference. It has some of the best coaches in it. So I wanted to take the worst possible team in that conference and go for it. Now, Shark had previously taken Iowa State, who was one of the worst teams, and he's in 2 or 3 seasons molded them into a playoff team. They made the playoffs this season. His gift, of course, this season is he gets Maryland in the first round, which may not be what he wanted. But I think at the end of the day, the key is know your system. So when I looked at this conference, this really powerful conference, I noticed some trends. A lot of the teams are long passing with running attacks, or they are just straight up running attacks. There was a huge gap in the short to medium passing, a West Coast offense, if you will. So I was like, well, if I'm going to go after this conference and I'm trying to be successful in it, I need to go to a West Coast hybrid offense. And what that means is some games I'm going to pass heavily, some games I'm going to run, but generally I'm going to stay in the context of a West Coast offense. Well, I should be able to match up pretty well with my low prestige against these higher prestige teams. Uh, on defense, I chose a 3-4 hybrid because, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of running in this conference. There's a lot of long passing in this conference, like Baylor and Oklahoma are like the kings of it. Frankie's the king of the rushing attack. So what I need to be able to do is have a defense that is moldable and flexible to the pass while still being able to guard against the run. Because anytime I play Oklahoma, I've got to be able to cover both. So that's why I went with 3-4 hybrid. So now what that means is I'm going to start investing in certain player types. Those player types are going to be a quarterback who has an arm but is smarter and has good accuracy and good skill. Running backs who are agile, fast, and have good hands so that they can run and catch the ball with some strength because I am going to run between the tackles. Uh, and then tight ends who largely can play in the passing game, but do have the ability to play back in the running game. I'm going to go after linemen who are better pass blockers than run blockers, but linemen who are generally agile over fast. On defense, because it's a 3-4, I need to find a nose tackle. I'm going to need to have defensive ends who are equally good at pass rushing as they are at run stopping. Linebackers, I need to find at least 2 middle linebackers because that's going to become very important. And then I need to have my outside linebackers be generally pretty fast. Um, the defensive backfield, they're going to, in an ideal world, agility, but I really need speed because speed is going to matter more against the Oklahoma and Baylor's of the world. So that's kind of the players I'm looking at. Now, coaching wise, I'm going to have to recruit like a madman. So I need people who are high in charisma, high in loyalty, uh, high in recruiting. I need at least one of my coaches who's really good at offensive and defensive coaching. And then I need people good at development because I'm going to be developing over the next 4 seasons. So that's what I'll need in coaching. So if we go to staff, the first thing I did was I took a look at my staff. I had a coach named Ronnie Broughton, not this Ronnie Broughton, different Ronnie Broughton, who was a good game planner, but he sucked at recruiting and he generally wasn't very, he was charismatic, but he wasn't good at development. So I looked at what I wanted. I wanted a West Coast hybrid, a 3-4 hybrid, and I looked, when we got the staff hiring, I looked across all the coaches and I noticed that Skelter at Louisiana Monroe had this really good coach named Ronnie Broughton, and he ticked everything for me. Great developer, charisma, loyalty, recruiting, coaching, bam. Now, the only gap I have is I don't have a great scouter. You'll notice that on the staff almost immediately. There's not a great scouter. So I went out and I grabbed him, and I'm really happy I did. The dude deserved to be a head coach. Skelter should just fired his head coach and let him be a head coach. So it's Skelter's fault, not mine. Locklear, I'm not going to talk about. He's an internal Ohio. I could have probably bounced him a few times, but I really didn't have the time. And I was already happy with Ronnie that I just said, screw it, I'll go with whatever this guy can do. I did bounce Hine. For those of you wondering what bouncing is, when you do an internal hire, you can hire, fire until you generally get a coach that at least gives you somewhat of what you want. And that's what I did. And what I was looking for here was the loyalty, as well as the ability to train defensive backs and have some development skills. Plus, he gave me a different mindset with a 4-3 if I decided to switch up to that. So that's what I did. I completely cleaned the house on the coaches. I am carrying some penalty as a result of that, unfortunately, which means that this year I may have some issues hiring staff. I got to worry about someone stealing Ronnie from me. Um, but the roster is probably where I made the biggest impact and biggest change. So at the end of last season, uh, and of course I went 4-9 last year. I beat a ranked Baylor team and I beat them pretty badly. But generally the team just sucked. So once I got to the end of the season, and my season was elongated by 1 week because at 4-8 they somehow invited me to a bowl, which I lost. But I went through my whole team and I went, okay, I'm gonna let anybody who's a senior graduate. So that was about 15 people. Of the remaining people, I need to assess who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. And again, I mentioned previously what I'm looking for, right? Because I'm going to run a West Coast hybrid offense. So what I said is, look, if you're a senior, you get to stay, but anyone who doesn't fit the mold of a West Coast hybrid or a 3-4 hybrid, get out. So I cut 41 players from the time the season ended to the time we flipped to the new season, uh, which left me with 39 players on my roster. So once I got them out, one of the things for the remaining players I was looking at very heavily is, it's great you're staying. I'm happy you're staying, but are you going to stay in that position? So I started moving people around. So Mott was a pretty good running back. I mean, that's not a horrible running back, but I moved him to tight end. Uh, Same with, there's another guy here that was a pretty good something fullback. So Mitchell was actually, if I remember correctly, was another running back who I moved to fullback. He was a tight end, but I moved him again this season to a different one. So I was moving people very liberally around. I don't think Gonzalez was a wide receiver. I think he was actually a cornerback. But what I was looking at is the remaining guys, I'm going to move you around until I can find someone that I can actually make a difference with. And there is one guy here that I do want to call out because I moved him twice. Where is he? Joseph Woods. So Joseph was a running back. I moved him to quarterback last year because at one point I was like, the season sucks. I'm doing horrible. Might as well just go to a completely run offense, which I did, but ultimately Joseph couldn't really run that offense. So this season I took him from, at the end of the season, I said, look, he's never going to be a quarterback for me. He's never going to be a running back for me. He's got decent enough speed. He can play in the slot with that agility. So I moved him to cornerback. And he really hasn't seen much playing time this season, but generally he's done okay. So now that I have 39 players, I had managed to recruit quite a few players during the regular season. But I still think I had like 40 something scholarships open. So what that meant is as soon as we flipped the season, I was looking at the recruiting and I was like, okay, I'm really going to focus the second part of recruiting on recruiting the hell out of the 1500 and up 3 stars, 2 stars, and 1 stars. The reason for that is there's less competition. Generally, in the 1500 and up, you're really competing against the CPU. There aren't a lot of coaches going into that space. There are some like Shark, I think Fan does it too. But once you get into 2 star and 1 star, you're not really competing against coaches, human coaches, and you're definitely in 1 star not really competing against anybody. The only reason why someone would be into 1 star is because they watched one of my videos and they're like, well, I'm gonna recruit the hell out of the 1 star and find these diamond in the roughs that Darren keeps finding. So I really focused on that, and some of my key contributors are 1 stars. But again, I do it mostly because there's less competition. I can offer a lot of things that they want. So, like if they wanted playing time, well, I have 40 open scholarships, and generally I don't have many starters left because I cut most of them. Uh, 2 stars, you're still dealing with less competition. When you get into 3 stars, this was the area I was actually worried about, that me cutting the 40 something players would hurt me because if they valued security, they weren't going to come to me. Now, if I'm the only option, then they were. So what I focused on was people who had no scholarships. And I went after them first. And if they had one scholarship offer, and I thought maybe generally I played out well against the other things they wanted, I went after them. I'm not going to do a recruiting video on recruiting 1 and 2 stars. I've done that. The key with 1 and 2 stars is you really got to read the text. You've got to put in the scouting dollars. And then once you get to 18 scouting dollars or 18,000, you should be able to at that point see if that person is going to be good. And they're still hovering around B plus, and they have terms like that. They're fast, they're agile, they have good hands, they hit well. Chances are that B plus means that they're in the 80s, and generally 80s is good. Um, so even once I brought in players, I still did position changes. Again, the best time to position change someone is as a freshman. It gives them time to develop their skill and get better. Cornerbacks, free safeties, and strong safeties are the best position to move someone to. Running back's the same, wide receiver's the same, because skill is not as big of a factor in those positions as it is as like a linebacker or a quarterback, an offensive lineman, those type of people. So what I would say is if you can't find people you're looking for inside recruiting that are like cornerbacks or free safeties, strong safeties, uh, and this would be converse, right, for wide receiver and running back. Find running backs, find wide receivers, and then just have the auspice of converting them to a cornerback as soon as they arrive on campus. I did that with a couple people. Probably the most particular of those would be Daniel Uribe, uh, who is this guy, Hill. Is I recruited him as a running back knowing that I was going to move him to a cornerback. And as you can see why, he's got 95 speed, right? His hands aren't great, but this guy has had a pretty monster season for me. I mean, look at this, 62 tackles. He's only given up 36 catches on 114 targets. That's obscene. Now, granted, 27 of those are things he's done, but I still think a lot of that is him bumping people off routes. He's picked off 3, returned 1 for a touchdown. If you were to look at some of the other people I moved around that were similar, uh, you would notice, like, I think Lunsford was actually a linebacker. I could be wrong. No, he's a free safety. I moved to linebacker. So Lunsford has also had a pretty good season. As you can see, 7 tackles for a loss, 2 ends. But I needed a fast linebacker, so I moved him. Again, talking about the 3-4, right? So the key here is when you're recruiting people, don't just recruit for the position that they're in. Recruit people with an auspice of you're going to move them. So I think this is important in the zero to hero model is when you're recruiting talent. You will figure out where they go once they arrive and you actually see their stats. Don't be afraid of the 1-star, don't be afraid of the 2-star, but you are going to have to put in effort if you're going to go after 1 and 2 stars because you're going to have to read a lot of player cards and understand what it is and then choose the ones you want to scout and then be okay with abandoning them when they don't work out. So Hargrove is the 1-star quarterback I brought in. He's had a really good year. He's one of the reasons why they've done so well. Doris was the guy I thought would be the starter, and he did get to start because Hargrove got hurt. And Doris will always have a special place in my heart going forward because he's the guy who kept Texas Tech from sinking when Hargrove got hurt. Uh, and then we've talked about the others, but Peebles is a 1-star. Again, you can see this. And I could easily move him to cornerback, but I didn't because I needed a running back that was pretty fast. The last thing that I'll talk about is the result. So how did all this really factor out? Well, as you can see, is Texas Tech was undefeated through its first 4 games. The Baylor loss was because I lost Hargrove in the West Virginia game for like 3 games. I made the mistake of starting Melton and trying to run the same offense that I ran with Hargrove with Melton, and Baylor just blew me up. So the next game, I went, okay, I'm going to bring Doris in. I'm going to switch to a long passing attack with a good run attack. And I largely throttled Texas Christian. I wasn't going to win the Oklahoma game. One of the problems I have this season that I still haven't dealt with, by the way, is that the rushing defense for Texas Tech is pretty bad. They have a phenomenal passing defense, but that rushing defense is horrible. So people like Oklahoma and Frankie with Oklahoma State were able to exploit it. It doesn't bode well for me against Louisiana Monroe because they're a rushing team. So I'm gonna have to figure that out before that game. But so I lost this game. Doris kept it close hill, and then of course I got Hargrove back for the rest of the season, and they were able to win those key games, make it to the conference championship. And then, of course, they lost to Frankie, but they didn't drop far enough in the rankings so that they made it into the playoffs. The real life parallel to this, of course, is the University of Colorado. So a lot of what I've done here is similar to what Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado. He uh, came in from Jackson State. They were 1-11 the previous season. 84 of the scholarship players that were there in 2022, 71 of them have left. think like 50 were transfers. The other ones I hope stayed and used their scholarship. I'll talk about that in a second. But then he brought in 66 new people, 49 of those of which were transfers. Of course, those were the likes of Shadar Sanders and Travis Hunter, who he brought over from Jackson State, but he also brought in some other big names as well. He's brought in 28 since April. I think Colorado is the number one person in the transfer portal. But largely what he's doing is he's redoing the whole roster and scale so he can try to get as competitive as fast as he can. Now, do I think that they're going to win 10 games? No. I think 6, 7 is realistic. I think he's still got some problems he's got to work through. Plus, they're in the Pac-12, and there's some pretty decent teams still in the Pac-12. Plus, I think he plays like Nebraska or someone like that, or Texas Christian, one of those teams. But Deion's able to do that because the NCAA changed a couple rules the last season. One of them was the 25 scholarship limit for football players each season. That went away. And then the other one is if a player stays at the university but is cut or leaves the football team, they can keep their scholarship without that scholarship counting against the football team. So my hope is that some of those players who didn't transfer actually stayed at the University of Colorado and are using that. But that has enabled him to do it. Now, a lot of people don't like it. Uh, Deion, he's a cowboy, right? He was a Seminole before that. You can't knock the dude. The dude is probably the best cornerback who ever lived. Uh, but he rubs me wrong. But I will tell you that his approach is the best way to get Colorado competitive the fastest. And you can talk about whether he's using this as a stepping stone, whatever, right? But I will say one thing about Deion, and I have a friend of mine whose son played at Jackson State. The guy legitimately gives a shit, right? He cares about his players. Now, is he harsh and hard? Yes. But I mean, at the end of the day, his job is to turn the University of Colorado football team around because they have not been all that good in recent history. And this is a path that he's using to get there. My job when I took over Texas Tech was to do the exact same thing. And I broke all the rules, even rules I had said don't ever do. I did them. And the end result is they went from 0 and 12 to 4 and 9, made it to a bowl. Still would argue that that wasn't right. Um, and then in the second season, when I had a full recruiting cycle finally, they went 10 and 3 and made it to the playoffs. So it can be done. I think in summary, the key here is identify your system up front. Your system should focus on who you're playing, what conference you're in, and what you are good at. Go out and get the coaches that fit your system. Don't be afraid to cut them all. Take the penalty. When it comes to rosters, move people into positions that are going to be most successful, but the people you can't move, cut everybody that doesn't fit your system. Then once you make those cuts, recruit the hell out of the low 3-star, 2-star, 1-star. There's less competition in that space. And when you're recruiting for talent. You are not recruiting for position. Take the penalties, take the other things that you're going to get on the field due to the low skill, but position change the hell out of players you bring in. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty confident you'll be able to go from 0 to hero in 2 seasons. Now, this upcoming season, I have made a decision. I am dropping likely LSU, and I am going to focus heavily on taking a team that is probably the worst in the league in a power conference. I'm not going to go into a non-power conference. And I'm going to pick them up on day one of the new season while I only have the 4 to 5 recruiting sims coming up. And I'm going to transform that team into a playoff caliber team in 1 season. Now, it's bold. I'm probably not going to be successful, but I think I have an idea of how to do it based on what I did here. And I think it's just a matter of me figuring out the team. Uh, who really, it's not going to be prestige, by the way. I'm going to look at the team and choose the team that is the worst overall team. And then I'm going to use all these tricks I just talked about, and I'm going to see how it goes. So if you like this video, let me know. I'm sorry I rambled a little bit, but I think the key of what I've learned here is really know your system, build against that system, fire your coaches, hire the right coaches for you. Uh, Make sure that you build a system in the playbook. I didn't talk a lot about that. I'll talk about that in a different one because playbooks would add like an hour to this. But when you go out, is identify the players who work well that you have on your roster in your system. Cut everyone else. Now, if you don't want to cut seniors and you want to let them graduate, do that. But cut everyone that doesn't fit the mold. Recruit the hell out of those lower star ratings. Recruit for the talent, and then be okay moving people around and getting into the position that you need. And then I'm pretty confident that while you may not make the playoffs, you will turn that team around really fast. So hopefully you like this video. If you do, drop a like. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.